Thank you, Penny, for your very kind introduction, and to Eleni for your invitation to speak at this wonderful and very important event. I'd like to also acknowledge everybody that's collectively put this evening together, and to all of you for coming along to support tonight, because without you, there would be no fundraising for such an important cause. I think it's really important that the subjects that in the past we've not really been allowed to speak about are now part of our everyday conversations with our children. It doesn't matter how small they are. They're intelligent human beings, and we really need to start having those difficult conversations and make them part of our everyday lives so that it becomes the norm for our children to want to speak out and encourage them to be able to talk openly with us. I feel truly privileged to have been invited here tonight to share our personal story with you. And as Penny mentioned, my husband Ralph is also here with me this evening. Firstly, I'm a mother, mum to Thomas, Madeline and Stuart. And being their mother has been my life for the last 25 years. Something extraordinary happens when you become a parent. And I think you discover a love that is truly unconditional. It's not a love that like the love you have for a partner that you might want to smack every now and then because they annoy you. But children, there is nothing that you would not do for your child. We've lost 2 boys, and I would have laid down. I know Ralph would have, and our daughter would have given up their lives for our children. Our eldest child, Thomas, was 18 years old. He'd just finished school. And he was working full-time and studying at university part-time. He was full of passion and the hope for what his future as a young adult was going to be. 8 months later, he was heading out for his first night out in Sydney to celebrate a colleague's 18th birthday party. It's in July 2012. And that Saturday afternoon, which was the first weekend Tom had stayed in Sydney, we were living in the country at the time, I called him and I said, "Have fun, but take care, Tom." And I told him that I loved him. He said, "I love you too, Mum," and those were his last words to me. It was school holidays and we were at home in the Southern Highlands with our 2 younger children. We were getting ready for bed when the phone rang about 10:25 p.m. And I thought it'd be Tom asking for directions because he really didn't know Sydney all that well. I answered the phone to a man from St Vincent's Hospital who said that Thomas had been attacked and that we needed to come to the hospital immediately. It was around midnight when we arrived, and we were met outside by 2 police officers asking if we were Mr and Mrs Kelly. And at that point, I think Ralph knew that something was terribly wrong, but I just wanted to go in and see my son. We were taken past the emergency, which I thought was a bit odd, and we were met by the registrar in the hallway and took us to a back room, and he told us that Thomas was in surgery, his condition was critical, and it would take a miracle for him to survive. We waited outside ICU for hours following the surgery to relieve the pressure on his brain, and we finally got in to see him at 4 a.m. I can't begin to tell you what it's like to see your child lying there helpless in a hospital bed. His hair was crimson with his own blood, and there were tubes and machines keeping him alive. The following morning, the ICU doctor that came on duty, she took Ralph and I aside and she said, "I'm 100% certain that Thomas's brain has died." But we sat with Tom and we begged him to fight. 2 days later, we held him tightly as his life support was removed, and at first his heartbeat was really strong. But it soon slowed and he began to turn blue, and we watched our son and brother suffocate in front of us. Later that night, we returned to the hospital to identify Thomas following his organ donation, and the 2 police officers that were with us wept. One had 3 children the same age as our 3 children. The next day, we were asked by New South Wales Police to do a live interview at their headquarters to appeal to the public to try to find some way that they could work out who had done this to Tom. And later that day, we returned home to the country with one less child. We were in despair and disbelief. And I think life was really, truly like living in a fog. There were people coming and going and bringing us food, but I don't think any of us really knew what was going on. Months later, Ralph finally answered a phone call from a very dear friend of ours who had been calling him every single day. And I think at that point he finally felt that it was time to start to reach out, to try and meet with as many people as they could to understand how this could happen in a place like Sydney. He met with the New South Wales Police Commissioner at the time, Andrew Scipione, the head of homicide, politicians, doctors, and many, many others. And Andrew Scipione had said to us at the time that we have the third largest police force in the Western world, with a budget of $3.4 billion, and 70% of their resources were tied up on violence. He said that we needed to step up as a community because the police force could not arrest their way out of this. From this point, I think our grief became anger, and then in turn it became determination. We started to look into the harms of alcohol, and we learned that excessive use causes 24,000 victims of domestic violence, 20,000 victims of child abuse, 175,000 hospitalisations, and 5,500 deaths. That's 15 deaths a day. And the annual cost to society nationally is $15 billion, and we're all paying for that. So we began to advocate for change and preventative programs, and in September 2013 we launched the Thomas Kelly Youth Foundation as a legacy to our son Tom. And at its heart, the foundation's prime purpose is to ensure that all of our children get home safely. We're not about not drinking. We're not about lockout laws, we're about values, and that's what we've always been about. Tom was known as TK amongst his friends, and our platform around behavioural change, we called it Take Care, and we spelt care with a K, taking on Tom's initials. In December 2014, we commenced the first Take Care safe space in Sydney. We have ambassadors, predominantly volunteers, who work through the night every single Friday and Saturday night of the year, come rain, hail or shine, from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. And they help our youth get home safely. They hand out water, thongs to young women who can't walk in their shoes and are walking around in bare feet. They help with directions. They take them back to this tented safe space area, and they can charge their mobile phone and reconnect with their friends that they may have lost, or manage to get in touch with family to get them home safely. Many times they save young women from sexual assault. There's lots of predators around the city, and in some cases we have saved lives. We have 3 safe space locations in Sydney, and in just over 4.5 years we have assisted over 70,000 young people. We call them sliding door moments. The difference in these kids going on and having a normal life, or something terrible happen like what happened to Thomas. The Safe Space program, along with changes to legislation introduced in early 2014, has had significant outcomes. Now, there's a lot of controversy, and the lockout laws are being reviewed for a second time at the moment, and they may relax them, they may go eventually, but whilst we don't have respect in society, they have definitely made a difference. St Vincent's Hospital has not had a single serious brain injury admission since. And previously there were neurosurgeons on call every single weekend, looking after people like Thomas. So countless sons and daughters have been spared from becoming victims of violent assaults like the one that took Tom's life. As a community, we need to foster behavioural change in our youth to create a responsible drinking culture and ultimately a safer and healthier Australia. Whilst learning to live with our grief, we started a foundation and we were caring for our 2 remaining children. We had a long and painful experience going through the New South Wales courts. It took 3 years through the local, district and Supreme Courts the Court of Criminal Appeal, and finally the High Court of Australia before our ordeal was over. Significant changes were introduced following our battle. The one-punch law, which is a great educational piece for our children. It's being spoken about in schools and universities at the moment, and I think it's wonderful, even though it is very similar to manslaughter. You know, if you do kill someone as a result of a punch and you're intoxicated at a certain level, you will go to prison for 8 years. So that is a great educational piece for our young children. Victim impact statements are now being admissible through sentencing, and non-domestic acts of violence under the influence of alcohol are no longer excuse. We advocated for this to move to an aggravating factor from a mitigating factor where it was an excuse, but we got to a neutral position with non-domestic acts of violence. So it was a step in the right direction. We also introduced a financial hardship program to assist families until they get back on their feet, and the foundation has now partnered with 3 Sydney universities. In February 2016, the New South Wales began their first look at reviewing the lockout laws, which they'd introduced 2 years earlier, and these changes really came about as a result of Thomas's death and that of Daniel Christie, who was also 18, 12 months after Thomas died. The community had enough of violence on our streets, and along with the review, our family came under intense scrutiny by some members of the general public. There were 3 prominent businessmen who did not support the lockout laws and were behind a number of blogs and untruthful articles that were published both online and in a prominent Sydney newspaper. As a result, our family received death threats and hateful messages through social media. Things like, "Let's kill off the rest of the Kelly dogs." Thomas would be rolling over in his grave, and Stuart Kelly is a political puppet. People soon forgot what our family had been through. Our innocent son was murdered without any confrontation. He stepped out of a taxi, and moments later, he was punched in the face, cracking his skull on the pavement and taking his life. We were told to turn off his life support, and at that time, our other children were just 14 and 17 years of age. And as I said earlier, here we are again with the lockout laws soon to be reviewed and most likely further watered down. And whilst I think Ralph and I have always stood back and said, you know, let's live in a society where we don't need laws like this, but we do need respect. And I think that has been sadly lacking amongst a lot of our people, not just our youth. So we need to look at that. I do hope we've learnt some level of respect during the last 5 years so we don't end up back where we started from. Our youngest son, Stuart, commenced at St Paul's Residential College at the University of Sydney in February 2016. Stuart took a stance against alcohol abuse and violence when he gave a speech at our foundation's fundraising dinner the previous year. 18 to 25-year-olds are the main sector affected by the lockouts, and they were left feeling angry because they weren't allowed to drink 24 hours a day. Stuart called us 12 hours after we had left him at that college. We missed his first few calls, and later that afternoon he rang us again and asked us to come and collect him outside Royal Prince Alfred Medical Centre. Immediately I was worried. I asked him if he was okay. He hung up the phone after he said, "Just come and get me." We arrived to find him sitting in the gutter with his head in his hands. He got in the car and he sobbed uncontrollably, and we hadn't seen him cry like that since Thomas's life support was switched off. We drove home as we knew we needed to get him somewhere where he felt safe. We tried over the next few weeks to ask him what had happened. However, to this day, we still don't know. But whatever happened to our son that night saw him retreat to his room for the next 2.5 months. And we feel that something catastrophic must have happened. He went there one day, a happy kid. You know, he was very popular amongst his peers at school. He was the head of his boarding house. You know, he was a school prefect. He was a fun-loving kid. He was a bit naughty from time to time as well. But he went there like that, and he came home the next day completely broken. On the 25th of July, a few months later, Stuart took his life. To this day, we still can't understand, and not for one moment did we believe that Stuart's life would come to this. We lost both our beautiful boys at exactly the same age, 18 and a half, and it's incomprehensible. And I'm not going to pretend that everything's okay. There are many, many days that I don't want to be here living this life without them. But we still have a beautiful 24-year-old daughter who we're extremely proud of. And we have to stay strong for her and live our lives, not only for her, but for the love and memory of her brothers. Stuart had never shown a day of depression, not one that we saw. I know he must have been suffering silently, and he loved his brother. He was his best mate. They fought like cats and dogs, but they had so much fun together. And as I said, he had a great year, particularly his final year at King's. He was a leader, and he innocently took a stance against violence when he was old enough to make that choice. He loved and missed his brother, and he wanted kids his age to know that it wasn't okay and that they needed to band together and to bring about change. He used to say, what's wrong with going out and, having a few drinks with your mates and having a good time, but today, they want to go out and be, in a terrible state before they actually even get there. We lose 3,500 Australians to suicide every year, which equates to 8 deaths a day and an attempt every 8 minutes. Why do we have over 70,000 people attempt to take their lives each year? We've learnt since losing Stuart that around 50% of those people that do take their lives don't seek medical intervention or speak out about their feelings. And I don't know how we get to the bottom of that and how we change that. But they don't necessarily have a mental illness. They may just be going about their life and think that, someone else thinks that it's okay to bully them or ridicule them. They might have been touched by a tragedy or culturally displaced or find themselves in financial ruins. These things may result in absolute despair and find that person feeling like there's no hope. But I believe there is always hope. Stuart, whilst was very mature for his years, he couldn't see that tomorrow could be better and brighter and that people would soon forget who Thomas was and the lockout laws. The ripple effect of Thomas's murder resulted in the death of Stuart. I absolutely have no doubt about that. Some of you here tonight may have been touched by suicide. This is the beginning of change. We need to talk and we need to listen. We need to understand it's not okay. Sorry, it is okay to not be okay. And that we are not the only ones and that there are people that can help and people that are prepared to listen. Having the opportunity to talk about our boys and have people listen is what has kept me going. At home, I've still got Maddie, our daughter, living at home and Ralph there, and they don't talk about Tom and Stuart very often. Ralph and I have had lots of discussions about the coronial inquest and police matters and things like that, but we don't talk about the boys. And every time I say that to Maddie, she'll say to me, yeah, but Mum, you only talk about the bad stuff. And I really look forward to the day when we can talk about them and remember the beautiful boys that they were. But I think what keeps me going, even though I sometimes don't like coming to some of these events and sharing my grief, but I feel that people are listening. And the little bit of research that I did recently about grief was that, particularly with women, they need to be heard. And it's a real shame that a lot of men don't need to be heard. And I think, or they don't feel they need to be heard, or they can't be heard. And that's, I think, why, we have such a high rate of suicide, particularly in our young men, as we said earlier, between the ages of 15 to 40-odd. So, we all need to start expressing our feelings. And I think, as I said very early on, is that we need to talk about, that it's okay to talk about things with our kids, little children, treat them like intelligent human beings. And if we get them thinking about not just bad things, but all the good things in life, but some of those bad things that come into our lives, if we start talking to them about those things early, it will become normal for them and they won't feel that need to repress all their feelings. Sorry, I've lost my place now. I don't know where I am. Anyway, children need encouragement, and we need to lead our discussions and actions by example. We need to be good listeners, and we need to let other people do the talking. I'm not very good at that. I do a lot of talking and not much listening, but I think if I can impart some wisdom, it is, yes, we need to listen. And no matter how young or old, everyone deserves to be valued and shown respect. After losing Stuart, we found ourselves wondering what we could do to increase awareness around suicide, particularly in our youth. How could we encourage those suffering to speak up and others to listen to those around them who really, really do need support? And so today our foundation is focused on building awareness around issues that affect our children and those generations that will follow them. We're reaching out to the community to try to get people to change their values for the better. So we established a second platform after losing Stuart, as we did with Tom and Take Care. And we've used Stuart's initials and we've called the program Stay Kind. This year we began our national campaign of kindness, and we've recently rebranded the foundation from the Thomas Kelly Youth Foundation to Stay Kind. Number one, it's a lot easier to remember, but also two, we need to be kind and we need to stay kind. It also gives our family the opportunity to move along at some point in our lives, and it gives our daughter the respect that she needs to be able to live her life both professionally and personally without seeing her brother's names from time to time in the media. Now, there are approximately 25 million Australians, and if we all showed one act of kindness a day, that would equate to over 9 billion acts of kindness. Can you imagine the kind of Australia we could have and what kind of world we could live in if people could do that and do that one act of kindness? We can bring it into our homes by telling our children what we did as parents that was kind. Simple things like letting a car in front of us, smiling at somebody when you go past, saying hello. I know that you don't do that in Sydney very often, but we used to do it in the country. So I think we could do it here. Sometimes people say hello to me and I think, well, they're weird, but anyway, we have to try. We've just held our first month of kindness known as Kind July. And the newly appointed Governor-General, the Honourable David Hurley, has agreed to be our patron of Stay Kind. We've asked all Australians to go to our website. During that month in particular, we wanted people to go to our website, which is staykind.org, and pledge an act of kindness. Now, July's come and gone, and it's a long time till next July, but you can do it any time. You can hop on our website at any time and pledge an act of kindness. It doesn't have to cost anything, just something simple, like you're going to smile at somebody. And we'd like you to share that pledge on your social media accounts and amongst your family, your community, your work colleagues and at home. Oh, I said family. These acts of kindness should be ongoing. As I said, we can do them every day. Let's see this message of kindness on a daily basis as we're now seeing Are You OK? It started off very slowly, and it's one day in the year that they talk about Are You OK? But it's on social media every single day. It's just popping up everywhere. So let's hope that that's what we will see with Stay Kind. I truly believe that the shocking tragedies that our family has endured could have and should have never happened. We should have our boys with us. It's time for proactive change. My generation, your generation, can start a movement that allows your children to grow up with kindness as the norm. Each of you here tonight has the power to build something positive, inspire others, and maximise every opportunity in your lives. So I leave you with this. Remember, if we each do our part with small acts of kindness, together we will see big impacts. Let's nurture each other, be kind, stay kind, and see what happens. Thank you.